Good morning and welcome back. Thank you for joining us for panel number 3, Inclusion and Diversity Through Effective Communication. I think this is a great panel following the inspirational talk from Chief Sharleen Gale, who's joining this panel as well. So we're looking forward to that. For our upcoming session, please post any questions you might have into the tab on the right under Q&A. And here to introduce this discussion is Karen Ogen-Toews, the CEO of First Nation LNG Alliance. Welcome, Karen.
Good morning, everyone. Dineza Sakoze Skyzit, Snakalia to the Stolo Nation for allowing me to reside on their unceded territory. Sai Sozit, Karen Ogen-Toews, Sanet, Nakwo-On, Sophie Ogen, Spep, Mitch Ogen, Satnian, States, Satsan, Patty Isaac, So, Nakwo-On, Julie Isaac, Deesta Gadimdan. Thank you for your interest in our panel today, and thank you for putting me on the stage, as it were. And thank you to the Fort St. John Chamber of Commerce and to the Tourmaline, Canada's largest natural gas producer, for bringing us this important conference. The topic of the panel discussion at hand is, of course, prosperity and inclusion through communication. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the First Nations LNG Alliance. We are a collective of First Nations who are participating in and are supportive of sustainable and responsible LNG development in BC. Our alliance mandate includes providing education and information to and for First Nations who are interested in LNG and natural gas projects and their benefits. And there's more. We also help industry and governments understand First Nations needs and priorities and how they can best communicate with First Nations. So indeed, prosperity and inclusion through communication is a key priority for us and a key field. This week, the Alliance launches a new two-way communications campaign. Tomorrow at noon, we begin a series of outreach sessions that look into the experiences of First Nations affected by LNG and associated pipeline development. We want to hear it all, the successes and the challenges, so that we can help First Nations get the most out of such development, and so that we can help industry and government work better for First Nations. You can find out more about our outreach sessions on our website or through our social media channels. For now, our outreach sessions are being held online, but as soon as we can, we will hold meetings in First Nations territories from Dawson Creek and Fort St. John to Kitimat. This whole area of prosperity and inclusion through communication is becoming more and more important as Canada and BC prepare to implement the principles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP. One key principle is that of free, prior, and informed consent. No more moving into Indigenous territory and simply doing business, a mine, a smelter, a pipeline, a string of oil and gas wells, a huge clear cut, or whatever, without free, prior, and informed consent from First Nations. As well, I believe we will see fewer of the traditional impact benefit agreements with First Nations, and we will see more equity partnerships with Indigenous people and businesses. All of those take considerable communication and make that two-way communication. You heard yesterday from Brian Cox of the Canadian LNG Alliance about the future of LNG in Canada. And you heard from Susanna Pierce of Shell Canada and formerly with LNG Canada. Both are excellent communicators and are sincerely dedicated to prosperity and inclusion for First Nations. This morning, too, you heard from another prime communicator, Chief Sharleen Gale of the Fort Nelson First Nation and of the First Nations Major Projects. All of them have pointed to the importance of communication and of building true relationships and partnerships with First Nations. Our panelists this afternoon will address how industry can best work with First Nations toward resource projects that are successful for both. A great example came last week as the Haisla Nation announced a 50-50 partnership with Pembina Pipeline to build a $3 billion LNG for export plant on Haisla territory near Kitimat. Pembina also announced plans to partner 50-50 with the Western Indigenous Pipeline Group to take over the Trans Mountain Oil Pipeline and its TMX expansion. And Pembina is also completing an $8 billion deal to purchase a competitor, Inter Pipeline Limited. As a very big company, Pembina can talk billions, but what about smaller companies? What about all those SMEs? What about the small and medium-sized businesses that cannot talk billions? How can they work best with First Nations governments and First Nations people? Now I'm looking forward to hearing our panelists' thoughts and advice on how smaller companies can best work with First Nations towards such true partnerships, both working partnerships and equity partnerships. So let me introduce the panel's moderator, Kevin Brown, President of KB Communications, based in Prince George. Kevin is an award-winning communications consultant with more than 25 years of experience. And he is not just an expert in the fields of communication and operations, he can also facilitate strategic planning. Kevin is professionally accredited by the Canadian Public Relations Society. And more, he is a member of the College of Fellows of the Canadian Public Relations Society. This in recognition of his work, his mentoring of new public relations professionals, and his advocacy for honest and principled communication. Now, over to you, Kevin, and to the panelists. Ms. Sai.
Thanks for that introduction, Karen. There I am. Hello. Good morning, everybody. Hadi from Clayton territory here in Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. Good morning, attendees, wherever you are, joining us virtually for this week's conference. Thank you to the Fort St. John and District Chamber of Commerce for putting this together. What a dynamo panel we have assembled this morning, and we're going to get to them right away because 60 minutes is just not going to do it when you've got all-star communicators such as Chief Sharleen Gale, Fort Nelson First Nation, who many of you heard in the keynote this morning. Joining us as well is Judy Desjarlais from Top Notch Oil Field, I believe Judy in Fort St. John. Clayton Norris is with us from MNP, and Joffre Jorgenson from Resolve Energy. So I would ask our good friend Kent at Eagle Vision Video to fire up the cameras for all of these superb panelists and welcome them to the session this morning. Just before we move along, and get our panelists to share their thoughts, an initial 5-minute overview on the importance of communication. Of course, communication, one of my favorite topics. I've lived it, breathed it in Northern BC for about 40 years. First in the media, 10 and a half years. And then as Karen mentioned, I've spent 25 plus years helping other people tell their stories. And I get to work with several Indigenous communities and nations, including the Clayton here, Carrier, Chislata Carrier Nation, occasionally Charleen's team at Fort Nelson First Nation and others around BC. And so I'm always in a constant state of learning. And at my age and stage, you know, that's where I want to be. So with respect to our panelists, Sharleen, Judy, Clayton, and Joffre, I don't see you live on my screen yet, but you may be where you're sitting. So with that, I think the news of the day, if you haven't seen this document yet, I'm going to hold it up close to my screen. This was a piece of work released just Friday by the province of British Columbia. And I see hello, everybody. Good to see your faces, panel. Boy, I can't wait till we can all get together and be on the same stage, and then look out in the audience and see a couple of hundred good people out there, all anxious to see what you've got to say. The document I was holding up that I'm recommending is my communications tip of the day, is a 16 document released by the province of BC last Friday, June the 11th. And it's a draft action plan for implementation of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. You might remember, audience, that act was brought in as law by the province of BC in November 2019. Then, just as work started to begin with the help of Indigenous leaders around our province, COVID-19 hit, and the rest, as you know, is a well-known story. Thank goodness, COVID-19, it looks like we in BC are on the right track to have our numbers go this way, vaccines go that way, and with any luck, before summer 2021 is done, we are all going to be able to gather more frequently in larger numbers and safely, and have conversations like the one we're having today. In the meantime, thank goodness for technology. But this draft action plan is out for consultation from Indigenous groups and leaders. The cutoff is the end of July, but I would encourage everybody on the call to get to the Government of BC website, have a look at it, because it gives us a great idea of the roadmap that's being considered to move forward in creating even more effective partnerships with our Indigenous nations and communities around BC. And specifically on page 14, there are a dozen or so ideas as to what the province of BC wants to do with our Indigenous neighbors on the economic development front. So even more pertinent to this morning's conversation. I see Chief Sharleen shaking her head. I'm assuming that means, Chief, that you spent the weekend reading this thing and you're about to tell us why it's important. Yours is the first name on my list of panelists, Chief. So how about we go to you now for a 5-minute or so overview. I will warn you, panelists, that Chief Sharleen will back me on this. When we say 5 minutes, we're looking for 5 minutes and 10 seconds. Just to be fair to all the panelists, but also to our attendees of the conference, because I know they're going to have dozens of questions for all of you. So with that, Chief Sharleen, over to you for a 5-minute overview on communications, partnerships, inclusivity.
Okay, well, thank you. I think a lot of you already heard about my key message today, which had a lot to do with communication and how we can move forward as nations, industry, and governments by working together in unity for prosperity. First Nations can't be left behind as we move forward. We need to be included in the decision-making models that are dearly needed to be changed in some of these big corporations and institutions. We really do need to see the I in ESG. We need to be a part of the conversations right from day one. One of the things that I wanted to let people know is that the Fort Nelson First Nation is working extensively hard with our staff and our community members that are on the ground, whether that's a trapper, hunter, gatherer, fisher, to develop a really concrete land use plan and development plan. We need to understand where development can occur and where it can occur. We know that this document is really important for us to move forward on this path of prosperity, for the fact that we need to know where things can go and where things can't. So I think it's very important that the communication starts at day one if you're an investor or if you're a big major project equity owner that wants to come to our territory and build something. Don't come with a preconceived plan. Come see us at day one, meet with the neighboring nations that may be affected by this project. Let's work together to develop the plan on our territories. I've seen some really big challenges in the last 13 years as a leader of my community when, big oil and gas companies came and they proposed plans that didn't meet the values of our people. So there was a lot of challenges that we had to overcome. But those challenges could have been mitigated and solved if they had come to us day one and included us as part of that conversation and the equation to being prosperous on extracting resources from our territory. In the future, those kind of things can't happen. We can't be left behind. The last thing that I want to see as an Indigenous leader is sitting in court, fighting over a dispute that could have been solved prior to anything. So I think that's the main key. Come see us at day one. Come communicate with us. There'll be times where we might not agree with the project and it doesn't meet our values. I think that should be respected. However, there may be times where we want equity in a major project, and there may be times where we see the benefit of that being in our community and we just want to support it. So I think be really respectful. Also know that when you're in Northeast BC, you're in treaty country. And if you live here, you work here, and you operate here, you're also treaty people too. The treaty needs to be respected. I believe fully in protecting the treaty and our rights to our territories. That's something that's not going to change with my leadership or with any of my elders or my community members. The treaty is one of the most important things that defines how we operate and how we work with the newcomers. The settlers and the newcomers were welcome to this land through treaty. And a lot of things have happened since then. I must say that back in 1910, 1909, when this was being rolled out through and across Turtle Island, that we were warned by other neighboring communities to not sign. And, it just goes to show why in some ways. I've grown up in the North. I've grown up in my community. I've grown up in also Prince George. I've been around a lot of diverse cultures, and it really warms my heart to be able to be a part of that, to know people from all over the world, and to be connected from, elementary school right to high school, growing up in the North. I think that we all have a lot to offer through our diversity. And I think that it's really important for the treaty people that have joined us to live among us, understand who we are and what our needs are. I believe that the more that you can be a part of our communities, the more understanding that will come of that. We have a lot of culture, we have language, we have our identity that we like to share with you so that you can understand who we are as a people. Our elders guide us on a daily basis. And, we have medicine people, we have spiritual people, we have healers that help us move forward into the future and help us make decisions, especially decisions that need to be made on the ground. And when you're an Indigenous person, you understand that all our decisions are made on the ground. And, things that we always take in consideration when we look at a major project, what's going to happen to our air, what's going to happen to our water, and how can we find solutions to better monitor cumulative impacts? And how will that affect future generations into the future? So those are some of the things that we think about. I've seen oil and gas come and go and just leave everyone behind when the markets crash and there's no opportunity in the region. So what does that do for the people in the long run? Not much. I've seen people lose their homes, lose their lives, and it's heart-wrenching. That's heart-wrenching for me to see as an Indigenous leader. So I would just like to see our communities come together and to start collaborating, to start communicating. Fort Nelson First Nation has done this work with the local regional municipality. We are partners in the largest community forest in BC. And so we just have so much to be proud of. And I just welcome this conversation of how we can really work together in unity. So, must see.
Great. Thanks very much, Chief Sharleen. I've taken down some tips, which I'll share with our audience after we hear from our final panelist and go to questions. So yes, please keep the good tips coming. That's what part of the conference is all about. Education, sharing of best practices, tips for success. With that, pleasure now to go to Judy Desjarlais with Top Notch Oil Field. Judy, what are your thoughts for communication, how important it is to achieve diversity and inclusion when we talk about projects in business? Judy?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome as part of the chamber. I'd like to welcome everyone, and it's exciting to be here. Communication through economic is everything when it, especially as for myself in business. I recently joined First Nation LNG Alliance as a diversity and inclusion outreach worker, and to gather the success stories, what's working, what's not for our First Nations people, business owners, the workers, employees, on the large proponents such as LNG, CGL, the major projects, how things are working for them. They supported the projects. How are they benefiting from them? And was it just a check mark just to say, okay, we've done our due diligence into gathering our Indigenous engagement, but that's as far as we're going to go. We're not going to give them meaningful work. Those things we don't want to see, as we want to move into a economic reconciliation. It's the resources is power shifting right now, where First Nations are more and more engaged into our resources, and there's business owners who are the next second and third generations, and we want to make sure that the leaders and the representatives and oil and gas companies are building or helping to build a sustainable future for our members, our children, and the generations to come. Right now, for myself in business, it was hard to get into the door. It was based on who you know at the time. We've been in business 17 years. It's based on who you know. It was based on who's in for leadership. It wasn't based on if you did good work and if it was transparent enough for you to say, okay, we're going to continue on with you. We were fortunate and blessed to be working with a great company who did take the initiative and say, no, we're going to grow with this company. They're doing really good stuff. And to this day, it's been 14 years we've been with the one oil company. And I really appreciate Sharleen saying, it doesn't matter where you're from, Dawson, Fort St. John, it's the relationships that's going to be built between whether you're the municipality, the First Nations, or the government. When you're building a relationship with these three, it's going to be the key into moving forward. Local businesses thrives when our communities thrive when local businesses are thriving, because this is our home. Treaty 8 territory is our home. We have a lot of people, a lot of children, a lot of students who are graduating right now. They're coming up. Some are becoming doctors. Some are moving into businesses. And we need to make sure our impact benefit agreements are surrounding and engaging and having them in mind when you're developing these agreements, because we need to ensure that when the oil and gas is done, that we're still going to be looking out for our elders and our children.
Great. Thanks very much, Judy. Great thoughts. I've captured a couple of things you said. So if panelists, I forget anything in our summary today, please jump in and just add a couple more. Next up is Clayton Norris with MNP. Clayton, your thoughts on the importance of communication, business partnerships. Judy talked about relationships. What are your thoughts on communications and its importance in today's business world?
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you to the Chamber and to Cheryl for all their hard work. I'm coming to you today from the traditional territories of the Treaty 7, the Blackfoot, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda Métis Nation Region 3 in Calgary. with the work that we do across the country, working with First Nations and Indigenous partnerships, when we look at what we provide in many of those partnerships are financial statements. And I really think what reads into a financial statement, quite often the underlying or between the lines is the success or the failure of the partnership really can be read into the communication between the partners. And I can say this almost getting to a point over the last several years, the most successful partnerships that I'm seeing with First Nations and non-First Nation companies are the ones that have either equity participation or very, very good communication. And it's moving into the equity side, as Chief Sharleen had said, is that there is a competitive strategic advantage for creating a very good communication and positive relationship on both sides. So when I look at the communication, there's the formal and the informal communications. We get called by proponents or whomever, hey, we want to work in this region. And they're asking the very formal questions of, what do we need to know about treaty? What do we need to know about Indigenous right? What about, all of the regulatory concerns? And many of those companies, from my perspective, forget about the informal communication. Is what is the expectation? Because a lot of companies will go into a region and say, well, I read or I heard that this community is looking for this. And it's judged on some other preconceived notion that may not be true. Have you met with the community leaders? Have you met with the elders? Do you understand what their strategy is going to be for the benefit of the nation, to say, here's what they may be looking for. It may be employment, it may be training, it may be straight profit, it may be 10 different factors when it comes to communicating the intentions of that nation, but vice versa. And I think it's, a lot of our First Nation clients are in the same position where they've been reactive in some ways. And we've said, I think there's a lot of proactiveness happening to say, we're not going to wait for you to come to us. We're going to go to you now and say, here's what we are looking for in a partner, and here's what we are looking for in that company, because here's where we know our vision is going to be. Here's what the industry is going to be, whether it's in oil and gas or timber or resources or renewables, like all of them. I think it's the two components of communication that really get spelled out into the successes. And when we look at the MOUs and the LOIs and the joint venture agreements and the limited partnership agreements, it doesn't matter how much time and effort the lawyers and the accountants spend to draft those things. If you've got a trusted relationship and communication between both parties, it spells out into the results of success for both the Indigenous, non-Indigenous, and we're seeing more partnerships in between different First Nations to say, let's stop thinking about it's a non-nation and a nation partner. There's First Nations that are getting together and creating some really exciting opportunities. So I think it's not assuming that it's going to be one model of communication, but knowing that, yeah, the accounts and the lawyers are extremely important to the success in some cases. But truthfully, it's really down to trusted communication between both parties. And, again, it's, there's a lot of different ways to create that, but I think a lot of the informal can be as more important than the formal documentation that goes into those agreements.
Music to my ears. Thank you, Clayton. Thank you, Chief and Judy. Couldn't agree more, not just because I love communications, but you're absolutely right. Good point about informal versus formal. Yes, our friends in the accounting and legal departments have to follow certain protocols and due diligence, but at the end of the day, as Chief and Judy have said, it's about us as people getting together, representing your communities, representing your companies. We all have our interests. We're human beings. We're all going through a period now as we try to process the recent discovery of the 215 children found at the Kamloops Residential School. So once again, we're into a period of proactive education for those Canadians who don't know this story. And so, we've got to share the good times and the bad times, but do it together, and we will be able to move forward. Right, Joffre? Your thoughts, sir, on what does it take in this day and age to move forward in a very positive way in partnership with First Nations and their communities?
Well, first off, thanks for the Chamber of Commerce for letting me represent the small business person and share my perspective and a bit of a story. But yeah, we're here to talk about communication. How do small businesses such as mine learn where to start to build relationships that are sustainable now and into the future? So just to specifically talk about communication, there's an example that I'll give that can resonate with some of the listeners, and then another thing, if there's any other small business owners or representatives out there, you know, if I can provide some perspective. You know, we talked a lot about the you know, equity ownership, and you know, like more from maybe a producer or a project kind of side, but being a small producer or being a small business owner, I can share some companies that feel vulnerable, right? Because we feel that we have to have alignment in order to carry on doing business. And in the last 14 years of me doing business, a lot has changed, and that's been a significant change for us small business owners in Northeast BC. So you know, to that, I want to kind of share the feelings of from our perspective. So I go back to like a junior high school dance, and you see the girls, you know, on one side and the guys on the other, and you're like, you know, you want to ask that person to dance, but just to go up there and say, hey, can we dance? You know, well, I can't do that, but so you think of, well, does anybody know somebody who knows that girl who could, you know, help bridge that gap? Or maybe I can cut her off at the drink lineup, or, you know, trying to create the opportunity. So that's what I want to talk about is I think that communication and creating the opportunity to communicate is really important in how we do business together now and into the future. So yeah, I'll get right into it, but resolved as asset retirement. So we've been talking a lot about growth and into the future, but there's a lot that the industry has left behind that needs to be cleaned up. So Resolve is in the business of doing that. So last year, the federal government announced a $1.7 billion grant or money to oil and gas to help clean up some of this dormant site. British Columbia received $120 million of that. So now in round two of which was a $50 million of money that was given to help clean up, the government did what was called a nomination. So communities, including municipalities, landowners, Indigenous communities, were allowed to nominate wells to be cleaned up. So what that did, that's what created an opportunity. So I'm in the business of cleaning these well sites up and putting them back to nature. So that created an opportunity to engage and to communicate. There was a good reason for us to reach out to municipalities, landowners, and communities, Indigenous communities, to engage regarding just to listen, to educate, and just to we shared visions about cleaning up this mess, and we shared values, and through that process, we created, alignment with multiple Treaty 8 nations, which was, I don't think the fact that we were given an opportunity, or there was a bridge between that gap in terms of being given the opportunity to communicate. I think that's what's important from the producers, governments, small business owners, is being given the opportunity to have these communications.
Great. Thanks so much, Joffre. Thanks, panelists. I've been taking notes fast and furious here. I hope somebody's recording this, because you have just heard from our panelists what would be a first-year university course on communications, the value of it, and how they lead to good partnerships. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to try to keep an eye on our attendees' questions, but as I don't see a big long list yet, maybe they're going to appear. How about I come back to each of you and start with you, Chief Sharleen. You talked about engaging early, come to us on day one with no preconceived plans. So I would think that would run almost contrary to what a lot of companies and organizations might consider doing in terms of what is our vision for what we want to do in Fort Nelson First Nations territory. Talk to us a little bit more when we hear you as a chief and a well-known leader in British Columbia about coming to us with no preconceived plans. What do you mean there?
Well, I think for our nation, and like many nations across Canada, we see the energy transition and major projects that are happening in our territory as an opportunity for us to lead. We want to be positioned at the forefront of this transition and take advantage of the opportunities for development of these projects or co-development. We didn't have this kind of opportunity with the oil and gas development that happened in our territory. Yes, we benefited from opportunities like contracts and procurement, but we've never had the opportunity to become proponents of these projects like co-owners, like we have with the clean energy development. I just can't express how proud I am as a leader to say that the Clark Lake Geothermal Project currently is solely owned by Fort Nelson First Nation. And I feel that we need to change the way we're doing business. I feel that these big corporations, they come into our communities and then it creates hardship when they leave and they don't make an investment decision. Thank you, Joffre, for bringing me back to my CM Finch days. that was quite, I like the way your example was. I've been through that before. So it's when you get to that point where you're like, I need to bridge that gap. I need to talk to these people. I know that in order for me to move my business forward, these are the key people that need to be involved. And I think that your example there, Joffre, is great because it is hard. It is hard to reach out to people that you don't know. And then there's these preconceived messages that are out on social media that, Indigenous people are against this, they're against that. That's not true. That's not true. And you'll find that once you meet with our leadership, once you meet with our elders and our youth, and you start being a part of who we are and start attending functions and just having that respect and building that relationship. So I think that, one of our best partners to have in any development is the small business people. We need them to be a part of the equation. And I have to say that when oil and gas came here, I was proud to see that one of the oil and gas companies made a very, very heavy statement, which really helped develop and build on the local economy in Fort Nelson and the small businesses. And unfortunately, not all Indigenous communities were included in that, but it was that in order for you to get a major contract for us, you need to set up shop in Fort Nelson, and you need to have a mailing address and staff. And that's the way we need to go forward, because what we're seeing is international companies, companies from other provinces taking away the opportunities from the local economy and the business people living within and around our nation. So that needs to stop, and we need to really come together to come up with a strategy on that, because we can't let the next opportunity pass us by and see small businesses close up shop and then First Nations not having opportunities. So I think we just need to come together and be strong on that front.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Folks tuning into this all-star panel, I'm going to ask you to go to the Q&A part of your screen to send our panel questions. My apologies for not giving the prompt earlier, but you get what you get when you choose an MC from Prince George, and that's all I have to say about that. Right, Cheryl? Good. I sure love the dance analogy too, Joffre. I'll come back to that in a minute. Judy, you mentioned in your opening remarks that your company has enjoyed a very successful partnership with one of the companies you do business with for, I think you said, about 13 years. What has kept that relationship going through thick and thin of the ups and downs of the energy sector and all the other challenges of COVID and everything else? What's kept that partnership so strong over the years?
Communication and creating meaningful work for Indigenous business like myself. Rather than handing me a shovel, they chose to work with me and help me grow to the business we are today. We are diversified in trucking, civil earthworks, aggregate, and much more. But out of that relationship, we created a employment opportunity training for my community, Blueberry River. And out of that session, we were able to capture 2 members and train them up on equipment. One of them is the road maintenance one, is what we did the training on. And to this day, we've created him, one of the people stayed with us, and he's now a full-time employee of Top Notch for 4 years. And we created that. It was a business model, and a lot of companies that surround up in the north, that are servicing the oil and gas companies up in the north, wanted to capture the same thing. But a lot of a meaningful relationship with that kind of oil company with Indigenous businesses that are local is what it's all about. Because I don't see any other way, because at the end of the day, when everything's said and done, we're always going to be here. We're stewards of the land. We live off of this land, and we should be benefiting off this land as well. As Sharleen said, the partnerships goes a long ways when you are creating a long-term benefit plan for the people. Local engagement and small business is what it's all about, because the small businesses are the ones who are going to carry this torch for a very long time and engage their people and bring back the bread and butter to the communities and to help our kids move into a more sustainable future.
Great. Thank you, Judy. Clayton, you mentioned in your opening that a 2-part equation for success involves good communication and equity participation by the host First Nation or First Nations of a proposed project. Have we reached a point, do you think, Clayton, in our history where, unless you're going to think about a true partnership with some equity participation by a nation or nations, you might as well shelve whatever project idea you have? Have we finally reached a point where you've got to be thinking multi-partner, multi-layer, a more inclusive kind of partnership model in this day and age?
That's a really good question, and I think it really depends on the size, the scope, the magnitude, of the project itself. When you look at some very small businesses and suggest that, you need to have an equity and you need to create a limited partnership where people are sharing? The answer is probably no. But when I'm looking at the larger projects that are impacting multiple nations in a large traditional territory, whether they're linear or mines, the answer is yes, because it goes to that advantage of the company or the business, whether it's Indigenous owned or not. And I think, when Judy mentioned that we're here to stay, that gives you the longest term competitive advantage to keep those, not just as employees in the region, but also the employers strong economically that can support the long term. Because in Canada, unfortunately or fortunately, we're looking at significant increased growth over the next few years in commodity and resources and inflationary pressures. And we're going to get into a situation where there's going to be possible labor shortage in a lot of our industries. We need more people in all industries and all service sectors. And if you have that equity participation for, in some cases that make the most sense, it benefits the entire region. And I think, Joffre, your analogy of the high school dance is perfect on the communication side, because I guess to sell the chamber events, that's the new dance hall. I mean, if you want to meet somebody, you go to the chamber to meet somebody to say, here's what I'm looking for and here's what we're looking for, and it provides that benefit. So, but it's really on the equity is everybody's got skin in the game. And as you can say, for both sides in partnerships, I've got something to gain collectively and through this partnership, and you've got something to lose, and it's both in it. That's what creates the what we see as accountants, the most successful businesses are those with both have interests to maybe different in whether it's driving profit or employment or other things, but it's really when two parties have got skin in the game collectively, those and good communication, that leads to the greatest success.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Joffre. You're going to be famous for this dance hall analogy. It's a good one. Thank you for being brave enough to share that. Joffre, you talked about as your company embarked upon the, I think it's the wellhead mitigation program. I may not have the title of that new program to get back to some of the well sites and tidy them up, make them safe again. You talked about how your company reached out to communities to engage with them before you began to share your plans as to how your company saw going about this. Can you give us some examples? You talked about going to local government, going to First Nations communities. How did you do it? What did you do? Who did you phone when you wanted to get access to a community? Can you give us some of those nuts and bolts things, and then we'll get back to some dance moves?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think just even understanding the importance of it all, and not knowing, the right moves or what to do. What resolved it is me being the owner. That was one of my primary roles as the owner of the company, was to reach out, to ask questions, to listen. I think for small business owners, there's people that like they don't know what to do. So what would be there's this person I can hire. I'll just give them money and then they'll make it all happen for me. Well, I guess, and nothing to take away from that, but, honesty, authenticity, truth, and just, really knowing that this is genuine. So our approach was just to reach out and to, there was an education piece to understanding how to nominate wells and what it all meant and whatnot. So I felt there was value in us being able to educate some of the communities, landowners, farmers, Indigenous communities on how it all works. It's like, oh, well, thank you, because I was wondering what this all was about. I know that there's all these dots on this screen and I just pick them. But so I think that, coming from being the owner of the business who That's being my primary objective. Really, it made an impact.
Trust me when I say, Joffre, the leaders of communities would rather meet with you than somebody like me. They want to know who you are, what you stand for, what your values are, and how you're going to include their community in whatever the work is that you're doing. Absolutely good points. We finally getting some questions on Clarence Absassin. I know you were telling us you've sent a couple of questions. They're not appearing on the screen for some reason. May I ask you please to resubmit those questions and I'll get them to our panel. I should also warn you, panel, as I say, we could have kept you here for 3 hours, but time is ticking. So we'll keep your answers short. Gary, to the point on employment demands for the region, it would be amazing if we collectively could inspire more Indigenous youth to take post-secondary schooling in environmental sciences and engineering. Tremendous fit as stewards of the land, and always a shortage of skilled workers in the region. Chief Sharleen, can I get you to start with a few thoughts on motivating our younger community members to go on to post-secondary and chase their dreams?
Absolutely. So there, like Judy was saying earlier, is that we do have a lot of our youth going to post-secondary and to university. Some are becoming doctors, lawyers, veterinarians. There's so many opportunities with that. So what we're doing for the Clark Lake Geothermal Project is working with a couple local universities. And today, actually, the youth will be touring the Clark Lake geothermal site because we do have Soto First Nations Akita 31 drill rig there. And so they're going to walk around the drill rig and they're going to look at the opportunities for employment and what the employment opportunities are for the next 30 years. In conjunction with that work, we're also looking at doing some apprenticeships with the well service provider so that we can have some youth get some extensive experience with that process. The other thing we are working alongside with other nations is our guardianship program. So working alongside with other regulators in our territory, whether that's hunting and fishing, ranger. So the Guardian program really involves a lot of environmental practices and principles, and specifically to collect data for cumulative impacts to see what we need that data so that when projects do come, we could see what the changes are to our land, air, and water, and then also provide solutions so that we can mitigate those issues for future generations. But it's not only our children that need to go to school to get this education. We need your children too to go and be a part of our economy and to help us be successful in the major projects that are happening in our territory. So encourage your kids. We're encouraging ours, and we're giving that opportunity. Fort Nelson First Nation invests $1 million to education to really help access the post-secondary. So that's why having our own source revenue is really important, because the federal funding we get is just not adequate enough to meet the needs of our people. Let's
not make tuition or housing or living expenses a block to getting your post-secondary. Judy, I saw you shaking your head. You're in agreement with Chief Sharleen that motivating our younger community members to go off and decide, think about what they want to do. Is that important to you in the future of your business?
Very, very important. Right now, as Sharleen mentioned, the federal dollars are not enough to educate half of our nations if we wanted to send them all at the same time. But in communities, we have this year, we had 7 graduates from Blueberry River First Nations. What's in it for them? Where are these partnerships when it comes to our students graduating? Where are they giving back to the bursaries or the education dollars or helping them move forward into universities? That's what I mean when we have to build a sustainable future. We need to give back to these students to keep them motivated and going forward. Right now, Top Notch, we've actually did our own bursaries for the graduates from a couple of years ago and last year. So we had a lot of thank yous, and nobody's ever done that before. And, it's, to me, I would invest in my children any day and to help them move forward, because they're the next leaders for the next 7 generations. So they're going to be looking after me when I have to. So I'm going to make sure that I'm going to look after them really good now.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Youngsters, go ahead, Sharleen, quickly.
Yeah, and I have to commend the Northern Lights College, because they're really looking at ways to diversify the I in their education. So they've been working with us collaboratively with our partner, Ridgeline Canada, to incorporate a program within the college that meets the needs of what we're looking for in our lands department. So best practices in our territory are incorporated in the environmental monitoring programs that they're rolling out. And we've already had a number of our youth go through that program. So we're excited about that, and it's only going to grow and make it better as we move forward in collaboration.
I see Clayton's hand up. Clayton, you've got some thoughts on this, and just to warn you, we've got about 3 minutes.
3 minutes, and I would just throw in a pitch for business and finance opportunities as well. There's always a lot of interest in trades and technical supports, and what we do see is that applies to any single business, whether it's in heavy equipment operation or catering or any of those support industries. That having a background of business in commerce or finance degree to support those students to get not only the technical skill but also the business skill, because we're always pushing the kids into, you should be doing this kind of trade. Well, do the trade, but also own the business. But don't be an employer. Don't be an employee. Be an employer.
Right.
And change that mindset as well.
Yeah, good point.
To support exactly what the chief is talking about.
Joffre, what are you looking for in the way of young folks coming into your company and helping your company do the work it does?
Well, right under our Resolve logo, it says we care about our environment. So right there, values aligned. And I think that, in the workspace of cleaning up our environment and retiring assets, general interest in cleaning up our environment. We're looking for anybody who wants to help us clean this mess up and bring nature back and let Mother Nature take over.
You're talking to an older guy who loves tidy around the backyard. So I want to see everything tidy. Folks, thank you. I told Cheryl we could do 3 hours, this group, but I'll just go back before I turn things back to our hostess with the mostest, Cheryl. Some of the tips that you shared, panel. Engage early, day one. Don't come to us with preconceived plans. Come to us with a vision of what your company, what your organization wants to achieve, and we'll help you design the project. Very interesting note for those wanting to do business in Northeast BC. Chief Sharleen reminds us this is treaty country. Get to know the treaty and respect it. Of course, for the rest of BC, there are a few treaties, but by and large, the rest of the province is untreated and unceded ancestral lands. So there are differences in how you approach First Nations depending on where you are. Judy, we support longer-term projects with benefits for future generations versus the short-term. Let's make something good happen, and in a couple of years you're gone. Everybody, I think, to a T, talked about relationships are the key at all levels through the region, in Indigenous communities, local government, regional government. Relationships are everything. Good communication plus equity participation is a key to success. Informal communication versus formal. I think informal speaks to this whole idea. It's all about relationships at the end of the day. Projects come, projects go, but what we want is to be able to meet at a chamber dance in 10 years and say, hey, Sharleen, do you want to go do that? Hey, Judy. So relationships are the key. And of course, communication. Joffre, I'll never forget you, buddy. Communication can be awkward at first, kind of like a school dance. But if you stick with it and participate for the benefits will come for everybody. Right, Cheryl? Thank you, panel.
Absolutely.
Here's a virtual high five and a standing O. Cheryl, back to you and the conference.
Thank you so much. And I think if you've done nothing, you've really, really articulated how important communication is. I can't wait for this dance that's going to happen after a year and a half of COVID. It's going to be pretty exciting for all of us. And now we know how to make that first step. So I think what we really learned here is that this is not about contracts. It's about relationships and respect as being the critical components here. So I think we learned a lot. I agree this is a 3-hour conversation, and I'm going to work on that. I'm going to put that together so we can have something a little bigger and more fulsome. I really want to thank all of the panelists for joining us this morning, and I appreciate the time you take out of your busy schedules, and especially to you, Kevin. You keep things light and lively all the time, so thank you so much. Our next session is going to start really quickly in about 10 minutes, and that's innovation and technology. I hope you all will jump on for that one. That's going to prove to be another great session. So we'll see you in a few minutes, and if you have a moment between your coffee, check out our sponsor pages and also the exhibitor booths. They've got some great information in there about how you can contact them about some of the things we've talked about over the last 2 days. So we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Thanks, everybody. See
Dance with you guys anytime.
Bye-bye.